right. Secretary Benson, thank you so much. Last month didn't work out for you to speak to the membership. I really appreciate your generosity with your time to come back, and the floor is yours.
Thanks, Chris, and thank you all for your flexibility and working with our team to be here. And it's great to be here. I mean, it's a great special day for Ann Arbor and for our whole state. But of course, it's also it's been quite a week, and it's been a challenging week for all of us as well, as the safety of our kids, our schools, and our communities has really been. We've been reminded of how sometimes fragile that safety can be. And so I know we've got great leaders like Youssef and others who are championing. And I talked with our governor this week about how fortunate we all are that she's at the helm at a time like this. I think she's uniquely positioned to guide us through it. But certainly this has been a week that underscores just how challenging and pernicious and urgent the moment is right now. And of course, in my view, and I think in many, that our ability to ensure we have safe schools, our ability to ensure we have access to quality education, access to well-paying jobs, smooth roads to drive on, or clean energy and effective climate protections, all roots back to whether we have access to the ballot box. And our access to the ballot box has been under assault. Indeed, it's probably all we know, it's always been under assault as a political strategy by the other side to restrict who have access to not just the vote, but really being able to hold elected officials accountable and influence their decisions. I view always that should be the voters, that should be all voters. And we know there are folks out there who don't agree with that. And that has been true throughout the history of our democracy. But today, we see that forefront and happening in plain view, effort to dismantle democracy that really began in earnest, one could argue, in 2016. But in 2020, we saw clearly just how far people would go to block the will of the voters from truly being come to fruition. And so I want to start by thanking you for all the work that you did that enabled us to prevail. And by us, I mean pro-democracy citizens to prevail in 2020. It was not easy. And there were many moments where I didn't see a path through the onslaught of challenges that we were facing after the election, whether it was misinformation, mountains of meritless lawsuits, or questionable partisan actions by Republicans in the state legislature to amplify misinformation, and as we know they're still doing, enact policies off of it. But when we come back to what was it that enabled us to succeed? And now, as we look to 2024 and 2022, we know that we must answer those questions so that we are prepared to overcome even more perilous acts in the future. It all really starts with the work that you all did in 2018. The work that you did in 2018, not just to elect myself, my wonderful friend, our Attorney General, and my great friend, the governor, and Democrats up and down the ticket, but you changed our laws. You ensured in our state constitution, every voter had a right to vote from home, and every voter had a right to register to vote up to and on election day itself, so that no longer was voter registration a barrier to casting a ballot in our state. I was proud and honored as Secretary of State to implement those changes, as well as our independent redistricting commission, which we can talk about as well. But it's important to note that all happened because of you. And my election and our election happened because of you. And as we look forward to 24 and 22, that to me is the winning play. Citizens being as engaged or more than we were in 2018, demanding and defending our access to the vote and our democracy as the paramount issue of our time, because it impacts our ability to have change on any other issue. Now, in 2019 and 2020, we worked and built a great team to work to do really with two focuses. One, revamp and modernize our system of customer service in the state. And I'll talk a little bit about what we've done there as well. But also prepare for the November 2020 election, which we knew leading into November 2020 was going to be the most challenging election of our time, not for the reasons necessarily that emerged during the election, like the pandemic, which we couldn't have predicted, but because it was the first election in which citizens around the state would have a right to vote by mail, would have a right to vote from home, and would have the ability, if they wanted to register and vote up to and on election day. It was also the first series of elections where those rules were in place for our election administrators. And so I embrace the work to implement all of those changes, like automatic voter registration and post-election audits and everything else, working with those on the ground and the grassroots level, as well as our clerks, to make sure they had all the resources they needed to do their work, more machines to process absentee ballots, more personnel to do that work of sending out the ballots if people requested them by mail. But we also knew that voter education was key. And so sending out absentee ballot request forms last June was for the August and November elections was critical to educate voters about their ability or right to vote from home, which became all the more urgent in the midst of the pandemic. So all that to say is a lot of work led by all of you went into the success of 2020. And the success was clear. 5.5 million citizens voted. 3.3 million of those voted absentee. That was 3 times the number of people who voted absentee in the 2016 election. And for 5.5 million people to vote in Michigan, that's more than ever before in our state, even the 2008 high water mark, which had been the record up until that point. So that's an extraordinary success. There was no widespread fraud. There were no security challenges. There was no cybersecurity threats that materialized. So we had the most secure, accessible, safe, accurate election in our state's history, all because of the work you did in 2018. So what that teaches us is that the work to prepare for the next presidential round in 24 begins now and begins in 22 and begins with our level of engagement and devotion and commitment to protecting our democracy for the future. And we know that is so critical right now because what's also happening? Well, some folks aren't so happy that we had a successful high turnout election. And indeed, we saw immediately after, as many of you were on the front lines of, exactly how far people would go to block the will of the people, not just in our state, but in 5 others, from becoming the rule of the land. And we know that the essence of democracy is protecting the will of the voters. What I think all of us underestimated was just how far people would go to block that will from coming to fruition for their own political gain. And of course, we saw that throughout November, throughout December, but it escalated with deadly consequences in the attack of our US Capitol on January 6th. And what I saw that day and what I realized the days that followed, as our legislature subsequently introduced 39 bills to undo all of our success from 2020, as we started to see candidates running at the state and local level who are running on the platform that the 2020 election was anything but safe and secure, that the election was somehow stolen and lying and running on deceit. What we saw then and what we know now is that the attacks on our democracy that we all lived through in 2020 were just the beginning. And we see these attacks escalating, metastasizing. We see the big lie being used to create the sense of illegitimacy of democracy that will permeate in 22 and 24. All of that is to say that we need the same energy, the same urgency that we brought into the table in 2018, successfully protecting every voice in our state, that we brought to the table in 2020, successfully ensuring we had the most successful election in our state's history. Now is not the time to sit down. Now is not the time to blink. Now is the time to double down, dig deep, bring back that energy, and make sure that we build on our success so that we can protect democracy against even more threats that are organizing and strategizing and coming to fruition in the months and years ahead. So I'm here today with that ask to say thank you for the extraordinary amount of work you did to bring us to this successful point, but also to say buckle up, roll up your sleeves, and get to work. Because none of us want to be here in 2025 sifting through the ashes of a broken democracy. We want to be here after the next presidential election celebrating yet again a successful election in Michigan and throughout the country where our voters' voices were heard. So that's the work ahead. And I say this very specifically to all of you in Washtenaw County and in Ann Arbor and throughout the county, because You are leaders in our state. You're not just leaders in Washtenaw. Your voices carry throughout the state and truly in many ways throughout our country. And we see that on the football field. We see that also in our democracy. So you have an even bigger role to play. Chris, your team, everyone, commissioners, Youssef, everyone, you have an even bigger role to play than almost anyone else in our state at energizing people about the importance of protecting democracy right now, rising to the occasion, telling the truth, pushing back against misinformation, and making sure people turn out and protect democracy in the future. And I'm confident that if we all do that, we'll succeed again, because the best predictor is the past. And we succeeded in the past by working together and getting things done. But I also know that without you stepping up, without you engaging, without you fighting, coming to the mat with all of us to get us past the finish line, we don't win. So it's on you. All of us working together to succeed again. But I'm excited to work with you because there's no other group I'd rather have by our side, fighting through the work ahead. I know you guys are champions. We're going to succeed, but we got to be clear-eyed about the path ahead and how hard it's going to be, and devote ourselves to the hard work in the months ahead so that we can protect democracy for all. So thanks.
That's great. I wish I had my camera on so you could see me doing this throughout your talk. I couldn't agree more that there's a lot of weight on the shoulders of the Washtenaw County Dems, and that's a big part of the reason why we're taking a moment to thank our volunteers today. Can you comment about your impressions about how things are going with the redistricting commission, the independent?
Yeah, I will. It's really hard because I'm limited in what I can say because I'm the secretary without a vote. I'm the administrator of the commission. My staff staffs them, and everything we do or say could be seen as trying to influence them if we're not very hands off. So it is an independent redistricting commission. They are fully independent, and I'm committed to that. I'll say an observation. I believe in transparency, and we've advised in our role that we can, on the importance of full transparency. We know also that there was a very extensive selection process where close to 10,000 people applied. I do have a lot of faith in the commissioners who have gone through a fire that they probably didn't realize they were signing up for. These are not people who've been in politics. It's sort of the function of the process, yet they are in the midst of a political firestorm. And they are, in my view, navigating through it the best that they can. It's also important to remember, this is the academic of me speaking, this is the first time that we've done this. And so I think my confidence is that in 10 years and 20 years, we can't expect the process to be perfect in the first iteration of it. It wasn't in California. They're now on their third iteration, and they're just finally now kind of getting into a smooth process. What we also know, and what I also kind of comment and say, is that when you upend the most political process that we have in our state, redistricting and gerrymandering, and completely change it, the influential people who are used to running the process, they're not going to just step aside and say, okay, right? They're going to try to dismantle it every way they can. And that's also what we're seeing. And what a lot of people are reacting to. The bottom line is that it's a messy process. I have confidence that whatever the maps are, they're better than what we would have gotten through this state legislature. And I think we have to remember that. And I think we also have to remember that because it's not politicians drawing the lines, there are a lot of considerations like partisanship, like protecting incumbents that are not part of their consideration now. And that's inherently going to change how people with powerful positions and with positions of influence are going to react, even if it's not explicitly talking about that. So all that to say is I'm really proud of the work of these individuals who are citizens who, again, came from all walks of life and are trying to do the best job they can in the midst of a nearly impossible situation with the pressure that they're getting and the machinations that are happening. And I haven't even looked at the maps. I haven't, because I've been so intent on staying quote unquote out of it because that's my job. But I have been clear that I think transparency is key, and I think they should be, committed to that in every way as the Constitution requires.
Excellent. It does sound like they're operating without undue political influence, which is good. That's what we'd hope for, right? That's the goal of the whole thing. I see Eli Nathans has his hand up. So Eli, you are allowed to talk. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. Secretary Benson, I first want to thank you for coming, and also thank you for the incredible job that you've done since you were elected. The state, the whole country, our children, our grandchildren, kind of owe you a debt of gratitude. I want to turn now to the Republican effort to gather signatures to restrict access to the ballot. I don't know how much you're permitted to say, but do you have any thoughts about how the Democratic Party should respond? I'm not. I
Yeah.
don't find the attempt to stop the gathering of signatures, I don't know, necessarily a winning strategy. And so I'm just wondering what other thoughts you might have.
I think a couple of things, and thank you for couching it so artfully and diplomatically. I think I've been a longstanding since 2006 when there was a ballot initiative where citizens were told sign this, it supports affirmative action, and it really dismantled and undid affirmative action. We have a history of seeing signature petition gatherers lie to voters about what they're signing. And so I'll just say that I think, making sure, I mean, look, you all are the truth tellers right now, whether it's in this petition gathering process or in this democracy. The misinformation is the era that we're in. We're in this era of disinformation, of deceit, and it's materializing in lots of different ways. And so I think first and foremost, whether it's to people signing petitions, any petitions, or whether it's, in the overall communications narrative, speaking the truth about what initiatives are about and what they would do so that people, if they do sign, at least are informed on what they're signing and not deceived, is critical. And I think that is important for multiple reasons. And I support the legislators, particularly like Jeremy Moss and others who've championed legislation to ban deceitful acts in petition gatherings. I think we need to do that. It's far too overdue. So that's point number one, making sure people know what they're signing on all fronts, and every initiative is important. And I think, secondly, when I look at this, when I put sort of my strategist hat on, I know from 2018 that the majority of people in this state on both sides of the aisle want the provisions and protections in our state constitution around the right to vote that are now there. So I would counsel that there are really two options, knowing that the people are on the side of the democracy we now have. One, find ways to replicate that success. We successfully saw a ballot initiative amend our state constitution in 2018 to create more rights for our citizens and expand our democracy. Who's to say that work is done? So especially everything we've learned since then. So I think there's potential opportunities there to continue that work that was so successful in 2018 through the initiative process. And then the second thing I'll just observe is that we do have clear protections in our state constitution around the right to vote and the right to vote from home. And I would anticipate or hope that those protections, to the extent that any subsequent things violate those protections, that there are legal efforts to ensure that those constitutional protections overcome any legislative efforts to encumber them. In the court system. So we'll see how it's all going to play out. And I'm not involved in any of it, but those are my observations as an election law person and as a person who's observed this play out over the past few years.
Great, thank you so much. Yes, that's helpful. Thank you.
Is an option for the folks on the side of democracy to put out their own counterbalancing petition drive and have two competing things be on the ballot at the same time?
I would leave that. I mean, it's certainly, the laws would allow it. We have a petition process in our state. We know that the majority of people in this state support pro-democracy initiatives. That's what we saw in 2018. So, I think that certainly what history would teach us is an avenue for expanding and protecting the vote. And it's always on the table in every election.
Right.
I'm sure there are a lot of conversations I imagine happening about that, but that to me, just from a mathematical standpoint, what do you do when the majority of people in the state are on your side? You work to organize those individuals to enact the change that you want, especially upending any attempts to use a minority sort of loophole. That's Loba, by the way, on the screen.
We saw your cat earlier,
yeah. But so yeah, you especially when it's so clear that the changes being advocated do not have the majority support of our state citizens, because I mean, if that was true, then you wouldn't use a very minority loophole with only 4% of the registered voters having to weigh in on it. So I think it's clear, and I just would encourage everyone to think boldly and strategically, and put everything on the table with how we use all of our tools, the legal process, and most importantly, the truth, and the fact that the people are on the side of democracy, to really leverage that power to protect democracy for all, in 22 and in 24.
Well, I'm gonna be a little more blunt than you're able to be, but I think that a decline to sign effort is doomed to failure, much like Eli said. And I think that I hope that there are progressive groups out there really considering doing a counterbalancing initiative, because if what could happen is they pass their anti-democratic bill or petition, it goes to the state legislature, it's Republican dominated, they pass it into law. If we've got a counterbalancing one, then it would have to go to the ballot, even if they didn't act on it. And I think we need to do that. So I hope that there are groups out there doing that. The Washtenaw County Dems are not in a position to lead a statewide ballot drive, but we would certainly, raise the troops up to get them out there to do it. So are there any other, go ahead.
If I could, from sort of three tactics what the other side is doing to dismantle democracy. Number one, spread the big lie. And not just spread the big lie to overturn the 2020 election, but to create this air of illegitimacy around democracy so that it's easier to challenge election results in the future, because people have been hearing this idea that election results are unreliable for so long. Number two, change the rules of the game to make it harder to vote and easier to overturn election results. And number three, replace the election officials at every level and at the county canvassing board with people who would be willing to overturn election results. I mean, that's essentially the strategy,
Yeah,
not just in Michigan and around the country.
that's right. Are there any other questions? If you have a question, please raise your hand. Well, again, thank you for coming. We really appreciate it. Thanks for talking to our volunteers. We will be there for you in the next election. Be sure of that, as well as Governor Whitmer and Secretary of State. Attorney General Benson.
Our brilliant AG. Yeah. Yep. Time to go to the mat, everyone. We'll get it done. Happy holidays.
All right.
Enjoy a restful holiday, and then
I appreciate it.
To work.
All
Bye.
right. Excellent. Take care. Thanks, Secretary Jeff.